This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode. Today I'm going to be talking to Kelley Erickson. We're going to be talking about how emotions influence our health, our nervous system state, and our mitochondria. This is going to be a super mind-blowing conversation, so I can't wait to share this information with you guys.
I'm excited to chat with you today. I heard you say it's going to be a mind-blowing conversation. You're kind of setting me up a little bit for,
Oh
my
no,
own
I mean,
stress.
just from your posts and all the things that I read from your, everything that you do, it's just, I'm always mind blown. I have to read everything 5 times so I can really understand what you're actually saying. But then once I get it, it's so deep, because you are basically saying that emotions are influencing so much of our biology. And this is super fascinating because we don't tend to think about things, like our thoughts, the words that we use, and all of this stuff, how that actually influences our very physical reality.
Right.
So let's start off by you explaining what emotions actually are.
Yeah. So emotions are this primal, instinctual, raw experience of the body. It's a response to, well, it's a nervous system response. That's what's happening. So our nervous system acts as this kind of antenna for our environment. It's constantly scanning our environment and picking up on signals, and it responds, or when it responds, we have a hormonal, physiological response that triggers an emotion. And so the emotions that I really focus on are anger, shame, and fear. We obviously have other emotions, but the reason I focus on these three particular emotions is because they are intimately tied to the nervous system. So if you look at the polyvagal theory and each of the nervous system states that we have, there's the fight response, the flight response, and the freeze response. And so fight is associated with anger, flight is associated with fear, and freeze is associated with shame.
Mhm.
And so these are it's just a response that we have, but they're not negative in the way that they're often portrayed. They're really, emotions are survival mechanisms, and I really believe that they are the most subtle but yet powerful form of quantum energy because they exist at the intersection of consciousness and physical matter. And so I came into this arena or this field for personal reasons, trying to help my son get better, and then, of course, trying to improve my own health. And one of the first pieces of information that I came across was the cell danger response. And this made so much sense to me. It explained what I was hearing in the quantum community. It explained redox, it explained the mitochondria, etc. But so the cell danger response is a concept that was developed by Dr. Robert Navio, and it explains how the cells respond in situations of perceived threats. And so it really highlights toxins, pathogens, infections, heavy metals, but it also explains psychological or emotional stress. And I believe through further study, several years of being in this field, I believe that it's the emotional states or the emotional stress that actually puts us in a state of being more susceptible to these pathogens and infections.
Mm.
And so, you know, when we're talking about anger, shame, and fear, and why it's so pervasive and such a problem, is because it's the foundation in which society is kind of built and thrives. So we can look at the work of David Hawkins and his work on consciousness. And he states that it was back in the 1980s that we as a collective kind of crossed this threshold um, of the frequency of 200. And so why is this important? Because below 200 is where anger, shame, and fear sit within the frequency of emotions. And so everything within societal constructs is built on the framework of anger, shame, and fear. And all you have to do is turn on the news or log on to social media or even just go out into a city and see how pervasive these emotions are and how they're kind of playing out in real time. And so back to the cell danger response, when the cells perceive a threat, the cell shifts from a normal state of thriving or energy production into survival mode. And we see this mirrored in the nervous system. That's language of the nervous system, right? So we have a cellular response that does the exact same thing. And so mitochondria, which we know as the powerhouse of the cell, which produces energy for our bodies to be able to thrive, they really play a central role in this response. They act as sensors to this stress, and again, emotional or psychological stress. And they detect changes in the environment and signal the cell to prioritize defense over function. And so they're essentially antenna for the bioenergetics of both the internal and external environment of the cell. And emotions, we know, carry a frequency. They are energy in motion. And so they therefore have the ability to alter the bioenergetics of the cellular environment. And when I say bioenergetics, what I'm really referring to is just the process by which the cells produce and use energy. So, one of the first things that happens when the cells enter into this protective mode of the cell danger response is we get a hardening of the cell membrane. And this is the body's way of like locking out potential threats. But what happens is it also locks out nutrients, it blocks cellular communication, and it essentially blocks the flow of energy. And so the cell membrane itself acts as a receiver because it's embedded with these proteins and these receptors that respond to the internal and external environment.
Yeah.
And so frequencies that are generated by our emotions therefore have the ability to alter the cellular voltage, right? And we know that it's imperative to maintain that cellular voltage, or we can see things like chronic diseases. And we know it through research on cancer that cancer cells have an altered cellular voltage. And so, we see other things happen. Another big one in the quantum community is talking about redox, and redox gets altered when the cell enters into the cell danger response. And redox is just referring to the reduction and oxidation process, which is where electrons get transferred for energy production, for cellular repair, for immune system responses. And so if this process is disrupted, then we can see a whole host of downstream effects. And so the cell danger response has three phases to it. And the first phase is what's called the initiation phase, and or CDR1. And this is where the threat is initially detected. But also this phase corresponds to the nervous system's fight or flight response. And this is where mitochondria ramp up inflammatory signaling. The body mobilizes resources to address the perceived danger. And then we have the second phase. And the second phase is what's considered the response phase, which is like you're going to battle, essentially, at the cellular level. And so we see further stiffening of the cell membrane. We see it mirrored in the organ system. So digestion is shunted, reproduction is put on hold. And this really kind of reflects or kind of mirrors the freeze response of the nervous system. And then we have the third phase is the resolution phase. And this is when the cells perceive that the danger is no longer a danger, it's no longer a threat. And then the cell will begin to return to that kind of healing phase. And this is where we would see it mirrored in the nervous system of the parasympathetic response, so that rest and digest phase. And so while these two fields of research don't directly reference each other, we can make correlations based on the research that this is kind of what's happening. And then, we can go back to like Wilhelm Reich's information or his concept of armoring. And he describes how when we have unresolved emotional energy, it creates this protective layer all the way from the auric field down to the cells. And it's the body's attempt to protect itself from this overwhelming incoming energy. And so a good analogy that I have used is that, like, imagine when you were a child and maybe you got yelled at by your mom or your dad, and it didn't feel safe to yell back or defend yourself. And so instead you may clench your jaw or tighten your fist. This is the physical manifestation of armoring. But when we understand energy and its inherent desire to move and expand, it's that armoring process that's happening on the visual physical level is also taking place all the way down at the cellular level. And so that's where we see it mirrored in the cell danger response. And so how this kind of plays out then, from, like, say you're the child, you get yelled at and you're not able to defend or respond. And so this may be a micro moment. But then as you navigate life and you begin to have more of these micro moments, and then maybe you have a macro moment where, this might be called a big T, a big trauma. And you've had all of these micro moments kind of unresolved, and now you have a big T on top of it. You're going to see a whole body response. And after the big T, that might be when you come down with, or you're diagnosed with, a Lyme infection or a mold infection, a mold illness. You may be more susceptible to heavy metal heavy metals at that point. And that's when you develop a chronic health condition. Unfortunately, unfortunately, the Western medical world still doesn't acknowledge this energetic system at play. And you may be aware that that big T is kind of what set off this chronic health condition. But what you may not be aware of is all of those smaller micro moments that kind of set the stage for that big T to be such a big T for you. And it really is a problem in society because we aren't teaching individuals not just about their emotions and how emotions carry information and how this information can be used to learn more about who you are as an individual in this physical realm, but it's also information about your soul and its ability to communicate that information to you. And I say this because anger, shame, and fear, again, are intimately connected to your nervous system responses. And they're telling you where your values, where your boundaries, and where you're living in alignment or out of alignment with your soul's greater purpose. And then, so when I finally understood that the nervous system is really a bridge between your mind, body, and soul, I was like, mind blown. Okay, next level of information. And your soul is guiding you through these energetic signals, which is electromagnetic energy, which is light and sound. And so then I'm like, okay, emotions really are, I think, the most powerful form of quantum energy.
So, wow, that was such a fantastic answer. I didn't know that we were going to go so deep, but this explains as well, like, how just like something, well, I don't want to say so simple, to discredit like the emotions, but, it's something so innocent that we think can influence us all the way down to a cellular level, and it can manifest all the way outwards that we can see physical symptoms.
Right.
And that's something that we are manifesting over time. It's just that why I believe it's so hard for people to pinpoint and to realize this is because it doesn't necessarily maybe happen straight away. Maybe it does for some people who are not as resilient. But again, that's what it comes back down to, right? Is like, is your body, why we want to be taking care of our health, mind, body, spirit as much as we can, is because we want to be as resilient as possible to be able to tolerate more stressors in our lives. So the answer is not necessarily to run away from stresses and trauma, but it's how do we deal with those? Like, how do we perceive them? Like, how do we express them or tolerate them, right?
Yes. I'm glad you brought that word perceived into the conversation because, again, without the inherent understanding that emotions are carrying information with them, and that information is about us on a soul level, then when we experience these emotions, we are tying perceptions to them. And often it's perception about our external environment instead of our internal environment. And so this informs how we navigate through the world, kind of pointing the finger externally for what's happening internally. And so when you understand that your emotions really are just this compass for who you are at a soul level, there's no finger to point anymore. And it's such an empowering process to be able to look at, oh, where, I'm angry right now. So instead of pointing the finger at a person who has made me angry, I can look at myself and go, what boundaries being crossed? what value am I, maybe, because maybe at this point I already know what my values are, but maybe I'm the one who's not acting in alignment with my own value system. And so then from this framework of understanding, then we become the observer in quantum mechanics, right? We become that it almost allows us to kind of step outside of ourselves and step outside of the experience and become the observer. And when we observe anything, we know that it automatically shifts its
Meaning.
yeah, I was going to use a different word, but
Okay.
anyway, it shifts its trajectory. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. And so when you just begin to observe your own emotions, you are shifting the trajectory. And I love all of these concepts of like shake it off, or having all of these somatic kind of tools that are really, really popular, and they're profound and very helpful. But I think where the deepest transformation or transmutation comes into play is when we step into that observer role and we begin to release the hold that these emotions have on us. And so then again, back to like these quantum processes, or systems within the body, we can look at the hypothalamus specifically, right? And you and I both know that the hypothalamus contains our master clock, and the master clock is responsible for regulating the timing within the body. It syncs up to all of these peripheral clocks that are located within our organs and our cells. But also the hypothalamus is intimately connected with the limbic system, which is our emotional processing center. And so we also know through research, or even through language, that emotions kind of connect us to time and our relationship with time, and it can anchor us in the past, keep us tethered via these membranes, or you could even look at it through string theory, and it's keeping you tethered to your past experiences. Or you can look at it through the lens of worry, anxiety, fear, and you're kind of future tripping, trying to control what happens in the future. And so emotions then therefore have the ability to be kind of this master timekeeper by influencing our master clock. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just another concept that like, this is so really just crazy, even to me. Like, I do get pretty excited talking about it because my mind continues to be blown. And so all of these really awesome concepts of like, or we know that sunlight is a master timekeeper for us, or a Zeitgeber, essentially. We can use food as a timekeeper. We can use social interactions as a timekeeper. And we understand that timing in the body is super important. And so then sunlight has a really profound role in helping us shift out of these nervous system states, out of these frequencies of emotion, and beginning to recalibrate the entire system into, into a more balanced rhythm, but also in terms of trauma and trauma recovery, using sunlight as a way to begin to restore harmony or equilibrium within the body.
Mm,
Eventually, you do get to that point, though, where you have to address the emotions. But I believe these quantum concepts, like using sunlight and food and all of these things, are the foundation because they begin to restore the energetics of the cell, and they provide us the emotional capacity or the reserves to then begin to address the
mm,
anger, shame, and fear that we've been carrying.
that's fantastic. Yeah, and so basically, like what you're saying is that, the quantum stuff, like the sunlight, the grounding, the food, and all of this is affecting the same centers where the emotions are also affecting. So that's why it can have like a bidirectional relationship, and it can all assist each other if we are doing things towards, assisting ourselves to getting out of a certain state of fear or anger or shame. And so when you focus on these different emotions, like what when you say you focus on them, like how would one work on them to remove them or let them go or release them from the body? Do you believe that the emotions are stored in the body, number one? And like number two, like if they are stored in the body, what kind of symptoms can people experience
Yeah,
if they are just locked away?
yeah. All very good questions. So to answer the last question, what kind of symptoms will we get? I think it's really anything, any sort of disease. And my son was initially diagnosed with a movement disorder, or what was eventually called Tourette's. Um, and I wondered, like when trying to put that puzzle together, like how does one inherit a genetic pattern of a movement disorder? And then I was like, oh, it's the emotional patterns of your parents or your grandparents get stored, we know, through epigenetics, right? And so the emotional patterns get stored in the expression of your DNA. And so, really, any sort of health condition can be a symptom of unresolved or unprocessed emotional um, imprints. And then to begin to shift them, I mean, we've already mentioned using sunlight,
Yeah.
grounding,
Hmm.
food, all of that stuff. I
Hmm.
think those are the actual foundations for
Hmm.
shifting it.
Hmm.
But then the next phase would be what I is the first workshop in my Roots and Rhythms mentorship program is mapping the nervous system.
Mm.
And it's becoming familiar with your emotional states. It's not trying to implement any nervous system tools, no breath work, no anything like that. It's just awareness. And so I do this by asking clients to 3 times a day just write down what emotions are you having, what behaviors are present, and what symptoms are present. And I ask them to do it for a week or 2 weeks and then bring that back to me. And then we begin to set the stage for pattern recognition. And oftentimes, this is where I see the most resistance. People are very resistant to looking at their emotional state, but also this is where we begin to see the shifting take place because
Mm.
they are navigating the world, you know, busy, 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 go, 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 stress, stress, stressed. There's no time for that kind of awareness, even though it is really simple and it takes 5 seconds of your day.
Mm. Mm.
Um, what they'll usually say when they come back to me after they've done it is that they had no idea. They had no idea that they were so angry or expressing anger or,
Mm.
or that shame could be involved. Usually they'll bring a different set of language, not anger, shame, and fear.
Yeah.
Um, but I can hear those emotions in the language that they use, which is
Mm.
a whole nother layer of like quantum energy,
Mm-hmm.
that those emotions are trying to find resolution some way, and
Mm-hmm.
it comes out in the language that we use. So I'm able to pick up on those patterns and decipher those patterns, and then kind of relay it back to them, or kind of mirror it back to them, and they're like, oh, I had no idea. And
Mm-hmm.
so then from that state of awareness, then I ask them to work into, or bring awareness into, how these emotions energetically feel inside of the body. So
Mm-hmm.
once they understand the emotion through language, then they begin to bring awareness to the energetic patterns, what it feels like. And then we can begin shifting it through, different ways. And I think it's important as a practitioner to mirror the language of the client, because I think, just like you and I live in different countries and our primary language may be different, I think our souls have a resonant language as well. And so being able to mirror that back to them in a way that resonates with them, it makes them feel seen and heard in a way that they often have not felt seen and heard, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
their entire lifetime.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess what that takes as well from the practitioner, like the person who is trying to assist, is that you have also been through these experiences yourself, because it's very hard to assist someone and to relate if you haven't been through the struggles yourself, right? Or
Yeah,
if you haven't worked with many individuals over the years, and that's how you gain your own personal experience. And I guess, as human beings, we all have common values,
yeah,
in place. We all want a shelter over our head. We all want food. We all want to be warm. We all want to be loved. So if we can all, meet each other on that level, we can find harmony
yeah,
with our relationships. But if we are just talking about things that don't matter, then, we can just be in disagreement about so many different things, because we just are living outside of ourselves, like you said, no, not internally, right? And it's the way that we are perceiving our realities based on our value system, and what's important to us in the world, and what actually influences us to respond in a certain way.
yes, yes, yes. You put that together very well. And again, another thing that people are very kind of unconscious of is that value system that they inherently carry. And so bringing
Yeah.
awareness to that gives them another layer of knowledge about themselves. And so when they're in conversation or in relationship to another human, and they feel that energy begin to rise, then they've got a set of tools. Oh, like, I see one of my values is being compromised right here, or I see that a boundary is being crossed, right? And
Hmm.
so it's the ultimate empowerment toolbox in that regard. Like, nobody can take anything away from you once
Hmm.
you have this knowledge about yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Exactly. It's all about awareness, right? And this, what you just said, is like just helping them see like a part of them that they were not able to see before, maybe like a time of reflection. You're also giving them practical tools
Yeah.
of how to be able to look within, for a moment, rather than always putting our energy outwards. It's just also channeling your energy so it's not like scattered all over
Yeah.
the place, and therefore it's not escaping, and we're not causing disease, when our brain is just all over the place. When we're able to channel our energy, then we're able to start to, heal, because our body has like the energy that it needs to be able to carry out those processes and potentially get out of that cell danger response that you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, it is really profound. And then it also impacts our relationship to other individuals when our cellular bioenergetics are altered, it's going to mirror back all the way up into our auric field, which informs relationship to other people. They pick up on the energy that we're putting out, right? And it can kind of throw them off if they're not aware of their own energy system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it has this massive ripple effect into how the world materializes for you, how relationships materialize for you. And then it feeds into the quantum field, that potential of information and energy, and it impacts, it's that butterfly effect, right? It has a ripple effect across the world.
Yep.
So it really is very, very profound work and a set of tools that you can rely upon over and over and over and kind of
Mm-hmm.
deepen that experience that you have with yourself.
Mm. I think that many individuals right now at this point in the conversation might be thinking like, or might be like a little bit lost, especially who don't know like that we are actually electromagnetic beings. Could you like explain to the audience like what that actually means? Like on what level are we electromagnetic, and just explain to us like, oh, why and how the emotions influence it? Because you're saying that the emotions are electromagnetic frequencies, right? And so many people just still don't understand that like we are influenced by something invisible. So if you could explain how we have so many electromagnetic forces that are being produced from inside our body, and how those external and internal frequencies that we can produce with our mind can literally shift our whole reality.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of like an easy way to just explain it. Electromagnetic, uh, it's electricity and magnetism, and electricity and magnetism are kind of these bi-directional forces that work in tandem with each other. And so another way you can think of it is light and sound, and everything is energy in the universe, including our body, and we communicate in this bi-directional relationship with electricity and magnetism. And and it happens all the way down to the cellular level. Like, again, we referenced in the beginning, the cells
Yeah.
have a voltage at which they need to maintain. When we talk about grounding, what we're really talking about is changing our electrical potential. It's putting our feet to the earth and gathering those electrons into our body that are working at the cellular level to feed into the electron transport chain and facilitate that bioenergetics of the cell. It's everything is energy, and energy. Hmm, energy is information, and so everything is also light and sound. And throw out something here, and maybe it'll kind of jog a way that I can put it to better
Yeah, so
highlight
like
it.
the cells are like decoding that information basically that we are putting out or receiving, from internal or external environment. Well, what I wanted to understand was, for example, because what I didn't understand, where is the emotion generated initially? Is that generated within the body, or is it generated in the brain?
Uh,
When we
I think,
experience the
yeah,
somatic, feeling,
yeah,
because you mentioned on some of your posts that first we experience it in the body before we put words to it.
yeah. So the layering process is, I think it begins in the auric field as the energy is coming into our being. And then we experience it we begin to experience the energy at the physical level. So at the skin surface, in our non-visual photoreceptors, like melanin is responsive to electromagnetic energy. And then it's signaled to the mental and the emotional body. And then we have that, and it's happening instantaneously, so fast, right? Like,
Quantum.
yeah. So it's hard. It's hard to say, are you having a nervous system response or are you having a mental response? And I think that there is so much overlap, but I believe what's happening is that energy is coming in through our auric field and then informing everything kind of at the same time. Or, does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to understand where does it like originate from, and that clarifies for me. Yeah, because I wanted to, know, like, because many times we tend to think about how our emotions are generated first in the head. Like, could that be a possibility as well?
In the head, I think what science calls it is in the subconscious mind.
Mm.
I believe that the subconscious mind is actually one and the same with the auric field.
Yeah, I believe so as well.
So again, I don't believe that it's taking place in the mind. I think we are like a quantum computer with all of these qubits of information stored throughout the entire system. And again, we're talking about the auric field, the energy body, right? And so, these processes of being triggered are happening at such an atomic scale, at such a small scale, that it's a response like a quantum computer. Didn't they just have this new quantum supercomputer that did these mathematic equations that they said a standard computer would take like 10 quadrillion years
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah.
I think that these things get modeled after how we function
Yeah.
in this frame of energy.
100%. So I'll shift directions a little bit now. You mentioned, like, in some of your posts that we get only 5% of our energy from food, and the other 95% comes from, you mentioned the heart. Oh, you believe it's the heart. Can you explain that for us? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we know that we only get about 5% of our energy from food, and a lot of this has to do with melanin's ability to harvest sunlight. This is the work of, oh, I forget what his name is, the human photosynthesis. Arturo is his name. And so we know that we can harvest sunlight and turn it into energy within the body. And I don't have any scientific research to back what I'm about to say. It's merely hypothesis. But we know that the cells communicate in light. It's biophoton signaling. And we know that under certain circumstances, this biophoton signaling becomes very erratic, very chaotic. It's not coherent like it's supposed to be. And we can see this under situations of stress, that this light signaling becomes very chaotic. We also know through the Heart Math Institute and heart brain coherence research that the heart and the brain are supposed to operate in a state of coherence. And when they are operating in coherence, we see these rhythmic patterns, very coherent patterns. And when they're not in sync. We see very incoherent, chaotic patterns throughout the body. And so my theory is that when your heart is unburdened, that it becomes the source of internal light. It is the internal sun that creates coherence all throughout the system and facilitates that biophoton signaling, which would support melanin synthesis, which would support mitochondrial function, which would support hormones and neurotransmitters and all of the things. And so I believe, I've heard them talk about like we're moving towards this functionality where we can generate our own energy. And I believe that that means that we generate our own energy from within the system. But I also believe that it requires complete and total embodiment of love. So I don't know that as a species that we are completely to that model yet, but I do believe that that is where the evolution of the human experience is headed.
And would that explain how breatharians can live without eating or drinking food? Kind of.
It might, it might also explain things like Jesus, right? And Jesus's ability to heal other individuals through touch and just being around them. And so that kind of Christ level consciousness that we've heard referred to, or individuals who are enlightened can go into a dark cave and meditate for a year or whatever it is and be completely sustained by that.
Wow, that's insane. It just makes you realize that how so much that we don't know, and we think that we have to, I guess the more disconnected we are, the more we have to rely on food, right? It would make sense that we feel that we need the food like all the time. But it's true that in the summertime, if I'm exposed to more light and I'm getting more grounding and I'm in alignment with the circadian rhythms, if I eat more energy, then I will just gain weight. Like, it's wild. Like, even if I, for example, let's say I eat the same amount of calories in the winter and then I keep the same in the summer, even though I'm getting sunlight, I would think that my hormones would become more optimized and I would actually increase my fat loss. When in reality, I feel like I gain weight in the summertime because I feel like my system gets an excess of energy. I'm harvesting so much more energy from my environment, so I don't need as much energy from food, which is crazy.
Yeah. And you're not the first person that I've experienced that with. I've actually had the same experience with clients that during the summertime they begin to put on weight because of that same energetic intake from food, not recognizing that they don't require that much food intake when you're so exposed to sunlight and nature in that way.
Yeah. And if you think about how certain, for example, carbohydrate-rich foods are more, let's say, calorie dense in the winter time, things like potatoes, pumpkins, these kind of things, compared to fruits. Fruits are quite low calorie and they're very filling. So if you were to eat, let's say, a same amount of quantity in grams, the calories of fruit would be way less in contrast to potatoes, pumpkins, these kind of things. So it's kind of wild how like your body is almost, nature has made it in a way that you need more energy in the winter because it's also colder, because you're contracting your muscles more to generate heat. Your mitochondria are trying to generate heat to keep you warm. And then you're expending, you're wasting energy basically in the winter time.
Yeah. But then the way that modern society has us living, they're not getting cold and
Yes.
expending that extra energy. They are living under high intensity blue light. There's a lot of confusing signals that's taking place.
Mm.
And that's why we typically see with the average American that wintertime can be a time of profound weight gain for them.
Yeah.
So, it is about finding your own personal balance, because each of our environments are entirely different. And we're talking about both external and internal environments, right? They're both influencing what's happening in the physical body.
Absolutely. So how do emotions influence our metabolic health? I know you kind of answered this already, but like, of course, when we alter our nervous system through our emotions, our nervous system dictates a lot which type of metabolism we are going to be using, whether that is, glucose versus fat metabolism. So
Yeah,
could you go a bit into that for
sure.
us?
Yeah, so when we're in the fight flight mode or the freeze mode, our metabolism shifts dramatically. And so when we go into fight flight mode, we need a really quick source of energy, which is glucose. And so we can burn through our glucose stores pretty quickly in fight or flight, which is normal and it's great, and that's what it's intended to do. It's prolonged fight or flight that keep the body relying on this glucose. And so you'll see things like energy crashes throughout the day. You might be someone who's heavily reliant on caffeine as a
Yeah.
stimulant
Mm.
to pick you back up because you're having these massive energy dips. You might
Mm.
also be someone that constantly craves carbohydrates
Mhm.
because you are in a state of fight or flight metabolism.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then when we go into freeze mode, its metabolism is shutting down, where this is
Mhm.
where we typically see extra body fat. Um, uh, you will struggle to burn both glucose and fat. Um, and so people don't like to hear this, but it is why I like to use the ketogenic diet so much for
Mhm.
shifting out of these nervous system states, especially
Mhm.
the freeze response,
Mhm.
because you're going to have to do something a little bit on the drastic side
Yeah.
to get that cellular metabolism back online.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be long term or
Yes.
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that because of the cell danger response, like when they go into freeze state, where you mentioned how the cells they harden, and is that the reason why they can't use glucose or fat?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes.
So then, like, basically, when you do a ketogenic diet, how does that assist the nervous system to get out of the state?
And so when you use the ketogenic diet, there's quite a few things happening. So uh, fat is a more energy dense food. So we're talking about animal fats here.
Yeah.
So we gain more electrons for the electron transport chain when we shift to fat metabolism.
Mhm.
And this is where it can get a little bit confusing if you don't, if this is new information to you.
Mhm.
Um, you want to remove sources of glucose, and glucose is anything that's a carbohydrate. So
Yeah, of
a,
course.
a Snickers bar versus a sweet potato, when
Yep.
we're talking about shifting metabolism, they're
Mhm.
kind of the same thing
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
regards. Now
Absolutely.
there's a whole insulin response and all of that stuff that takes place. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
try not to take that quite too literally, but when we're talking about shifting cellular metabolism, we're referring to that. And
Yeah.
so we want to shift it in away from a state of glycolysis, which is being a sugar burner, into a state of fat metabolism. And when we burn fat for fuel, we not only create more energy, but we also create more metabolic water. And this metabolic water is really important for whole body function, including nervous system function. It is beneficial for the fascia, and the fascia informs the nervous system. I mean, it's a whole body response, right? And so, what was your original question?
Oh, I think my question was, I lost my question as well.
Okay.
Well, basically, what I was thinking was, yeah, basically, how do people, when they think about going into a ketogenic diet, I totally lost my train of thought as well. We'll get it back. We'll be back
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So
Yeah, no
basically,
worries.
we were talking about metabolic health and how like emotions influence basically our metabolic health. And so basically, yeah, how ketogenic diet assists us. That's like a tool or a method that you like to use with your clients
Yeah.
to help them to get out of those fight and flight, nervous system shutdown states. And so basically, are you saying that the excess energy availability that they get, because, they have an abundance of energy supply from the ketogenic diet, that is the reason that they are able to shift their energetic state or their emotional state?
Yeah. So we'll back it up just a little bit. So the fight or flight response is different than the freeze response. And when we go into freeze, like nervous system freeze, we can think of it in the exact same way at the metabolism level. It's frozen, essentially.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
want to do something to light the fire, to kind of thaw it and get it back into energy production. And we can, the fuel for that fire can be animal fat. Now, when we're talking about the fight or flight response, it's not quite the same. And in fact, going into the ketogenic diet is a type of stressor on the body. And so it can actually highlight the fight or flight response. But it's not, that doesn't mean a bad thing. And when I'm talking about the fight or flight response or the freeze response, I'm talking about prolonged chronic.
Yeah.
Someone who's struggling with anger on a regular basis still isn't in a chronic state of fight, right? They come back into balance, so to speak, what their nervous system set point is. It's when they're triggered that they're triggered into that fight response, they're triggered into that flight response. The freeze response is a little bit different. It's prolonged, overwhelming activation, and it is the gas pedal and the brake being pressed at the same time. So it is where we see someone who's struggled with fight or flight for too long can end up in freeze. So, I think it's important to understand the differentiation, because fight and flight themselves aren't bad. They're designed to inform you again about your environment.
Yeah.
It's when prolonged and we end up in that kind of frozen state that now we're talking about kind of, chronic health conditions.
So you're saying that when we stay stuck in the sympathetic fight and flight, we eventually end up in freeze because we've been going so long in fight and flight that we basically burn out.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I was going to say something else and then I forgot. But yeah, so the fight or flight response, they're not bad, and it gets a little confusing in the language, this perception that they're bad.
Yeah.
But if you're someone who's being triggered into fight or flight, it's just those emotions that are trying to highlight something to you. It's anger and fear. And so again, we're not talking about anything that's dysfunctional within the system. Everything's operating the way it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
It's when we get into that prolonged state, that freeze response, or we start dipping our toes in that freeze response, that then we're talking about not being able to get out on your own often.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yes. So somebody who is, for example, is stuck in a sympathetic fight and flight state, would you say that they would benefit actually of eating some carbs as well to potentially take them out of that state, at some point, maybe by lowering cortisol levels or, spiking insulin, for temporarily bringing them out of that state, potentially stopping that cascade of prolonged, sympathetic activity?
Right. Yes. No, yes, you're absolutely correct. And so, using, carbohydrates in that regard can be extremely beneficial, but now this is where we get into the nuance. We're not talking about a Snickers bar, right? We're talking more maybe a sweet potato or, right. Yeah, exactly. So yes, I think it's a very nuanced conversation, and
Absolutely.
there's so much that goes into play around it that I think it's important. It's a conversation to have with a practitioner like yourself, right? Instead of taking a certain sentence or two that maybe you hear on the internet and trying to apply it in big picture.
Yes.
You know.
I guess another thing I want to illuminate now while we're on this topic, which is I've been like trying to put all these pieces of the puzzle together lately because, I've also been very confused about all of these topics because it is very confusing. You hear about keto, carnivore, like the bioenergetic space. You hear about all these different opinions and they're all pretty much, conflicting. And what I have come to a middle ground that that it's good for us to be like in ketosis, for example, like at certain times of the day, like especially if we eat our dinner early, and we are basically having a bigger fasting window, we're able to tap into ketosis. We can eat some carbs at some time of the day, maybe before our workout, and we're going to be utilizing that in our training, which eventually we will get into ketosis after training again because we have utilized our glucose. So we're able to implement kind of both worlds as long as we know like what we're doing. And one thing I guess what I wanted to say was that even if people are doing the ketogenic diet, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are in ketosis because, for example, if their nervous system state is in a sympathetic state, as you said, they are running on glucose metabolism. So if they're eating, high fat and, high and lower protein, they can still potentially be going into gluconeogenesis if their body is extremely stressed out.
Yes.
And so this is something that's super important for people to understand that if you care about getting in ketosis, you have to deal with your nervous system state like big time. Because if you don't deal with that and you have all the stresses in the world and you're doing a ketogenic diet, which could potentially be, stressing you more if your body feels like it's not getting the energy that it needs, then we're going to be stuck in this like constant like glucose metabolism and our body's going to be feeling it's like not getting the energy that it needs because all the hormones are not working correctly, right? Leptin's not working. It's not telling our body that we have an abundant, source of energy. Even it's not perceiving the amount of food that we're getting in. So we're always in a energy deficit, or the brain thinks we're in an energy deficit. And so we're always running on this gluconeogenesis pathway when in reality we want to be tapping into ketosis, which is where there is an abundant energy supply because body fat is, we've got so much body fat. Even if you see your six pack, you still have so much body fat on your system. for it to be able to thrive and to feel like it's got an abundant energy source.
Yeah, and it's unique to each individual. And
Yes.
so, but like you said, from my own experience, when I began the ketogenic diet, I also started the 75 hard program. So I was working out twice a day. And I was in the throes of trying to help my son with his health conditions. So my emotional state, my nervous system, it was at max capacity. And so, I mean, I still saw benefits from the some profound benefits from the ketogenic diet. But what I noticed compared to other people is that when I would test my ketones, I mean, I couldn't stay in ketosis. I could dip in and then I'd be right back out. And yes, and that's what you're highlighting, is that my liver, my body was producing its own glucose because of the stress that I was under.
Yeah.
And so again, working with a practitioner, if you want to utilize something like the ketogenic diet so that you can have someone help you understand what your personal stressors are and what you can do to reap the best benefits, and then begin to navigate the experience. And if you are metabolically healthy, you should be able to dip into a very light state of ketosis every evening
Yes.
time. But what I also found was that prolonged ketosis, so over 2 years, 3 years, etc., can actually then begin to shift you in the opposite direction. And what I see happening is that people begin gaining weight because their body's like, oh shit, I'm kind of in a starvation mode. When am I, I've got to hang on to this extra energy.
Yeah.
Because the ketogenic diet is a fasting mimicking diet.
Yes.
So you're kind of sending the signal that you're low on resources, right? So you tap into your fat reserves on your body and utilize them as a fuel resource.
Yes.
But so anything in excess is not a good idea. And if you ever listen to Lauren and I's podcast, we really highlight this, that you are the experiment, you are the lead researcher, and you're the lab assistant. There isn't anyone out there that is going to know you better than you know your own body.
Yeah.
And so it's great that we have platforms like Instagram where you and I can be coaches and help individuals. But the truth of the matter is, there isn't anyone who has the potential to know you better than you know yourself. And so this does become a journey, again, back to these emotions and awareness. It really highlights learning about how your body feels and responds and works, and not relying on someone else to kind of give you X, Y, and Z. We obviously need this. We're coaches. We rely on someone coming to us and asking for X, Y, Z. But I know through my practice that giving someone a strict protocol, it never felt right. And neither one of us saw the results that we wanted. It wasn't until I began listening to them and them kind of leading the way, and then I fill in the gaps, like, okay, this is what I see for you, let's try this. And then asking them to come back with feedback and bring their results and what did they feel and all of that stuff, that then things really began to, like, okay, I like this kind of coaching. I'm not here. It doesn't really work that way.
Mhm. Yeah. Personalized approach is so important. I mean, if you just have a cookie cutter program, and you're just giving everybody the same thing, especially when it comes to things like nutrition or even exercising, it just doesn't work. Everybody's so different. Everybody's anatomy is different. Everyone's biology is different, like their background, their emotional status, nervous system state. So, if you're able to understand them on as many levels as possible, like, because you also have such a great experience with all of this, you're able to give them the best, tools to be able to implement and to show them that, hey, like, try and implement this in your life and report back to me how you feel, once you've done this. And, you can always change trajectory. You don't always have to stick to something just because you've heard it online and you think that's like the best thing. If you hear like fasting is like the best thing for me, it's going to get rid of all these, zombie cells or whatever, from your system, doesn't mean that you have to do it chronically. There is a time and place for everything, and just the same thing as with vilifying carbs as well. There is just so much of this going on the internet, and it's just so unnecessary. It's just that I think that we all need to understand that the body, what we need to do is we need to assist the body to work more efficiently, so that we are able to tolerate eating more carbs and tolerate eating all the things that we love and we enjoy, and to be in a better, more regulated nervous system state. And that's why we are having this discussion today, because clearly emotions are having such a massive impact on our biology,
Right.
and on our spiritual biology as well. So it's like impacting us on every single level. And so if we are not treating the mind and the emotions and the relationship that we have with ourselves, we can never truly be healthy, even if we are doing the diet, the exercise, even if we're doing the quantum stuff, like Kelley said. Like, that's a fantastic way for us to be able to start to go towards the healing path of maybe dealing, processing or releasing some of those emotions. But eventually we have to look within and have some time of self-reflection and release, and become one and realize what our values are, and start loving again.
Yeah. And then we can use this, take it to the next level and use seasonal patterns, which you haven't used the exact words, but that's kind of what we're referring to, is using seasonal patterns to kind of guide us in our eating patterns. But also you can use these seasonal patterns to help you navigate your own emotional experience. So like right now in the Northern Hemisphere, we're approaching the winter solstice, right? And so it's going to be the shortest daylight of the year, likely cold for many individuals. And so this is really a time where we can go turn inward and have some really profound, reflective experiences, and then kind of allow the return of sunlight to also kind of mirror this return of ourselves out of this dark space. And so again, as above, so below, it's all kind of a reflection of itself as we navigate it.
Yep.
And I do think it's important to highlight, you kind of said it, but this assumption that the ketogenic diet or the carnivore diet or all the quantum or all these different, nervous system practices, that everything applies to everyone, and it just doesn't. And I don't know about you, but I went down this road, and I also think it mirrors our nervous system states, this kind of black and white thinking that we kind of get locked into when we're in fight or flight mode. But this all or nothing, go hard or go home kind of response, and it will provide results in the beginning, because it's likely a really big shift from the way you were living before. But at some point you're going to start to recognize that you're not feeling as great, or it's, you're kind of stalled, you've hit a plateau, and you're going, well, what's happening here? Because this was working. And it's not that you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you do need to recognize that you need balance.
Yes.
You need joy, you need happiness, you need to honor your desires.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that may be eating cake or doing, staying up late watching a movie with a friend, or you're not gonna die from 1 day's of exposure to
Yeah.
non-native EMFs or the
Yeah.
bad lighting.
Yeah.
And in fact, it might be your thoughts about the bad lighting and the non-native EMFs
Yeah.
and the carbohydrates that are actually producing the negative effects rather than those things itself.
Absolutely. And this exactly just what we said at the beginning of the podcast, it's just about making your body more resilient. That's
Yeah.
why we want to be doing these like healthy practices the majority of the time. And every now and then we can, do something that's, if you feel like, if you don't feel like, if you, that's how you want to live your life, then that's up to you. But, most people, they want to just once every so often eat popcorn or, eat
Yeah.
chocolate or do something that's called naughty, or because in our head we have classified it as that way. But in reality, yeah, what we're saying when we say by imbalance, we're not saying that, oh yeah, every weekend just like binge. But what we're saying is that, if you live the majority of your time, in a healthy state, it's okay every so often to, go a bit off track. But of course, if you have a specific goal in mind, this is what I tell my clients, like, if you have a target within 12 weeks you want to reach, I don't recommend that you go off the rails like every
Yeah.
weekend. We have to stick on the track for 12 weeks. And then maybe after that, we can consider taking some breaks, from dieting or exercising or certain ways of doing, which were more confining or constricting,
Yeah. Yeah.
before. So, if you don't have any serious goals, straight away, but you are all the time working on your health, then of course the majority of the time you can be, in a healthy state. And then your aim is to try and make your gut as resilient as possible, your mind as clear as possible, to live in alignment with your values, so that you're living life feeling like you're fulfilling your purpose and that you are being who you want to be
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Because if you're pretending to be somebody who you're not, you are suppressing like so much inside, and eventually you reach either that burnout point, or you explode with anger, fear, aggression, all these things that we were talking about.
Yeah. And you just highlighted everything we talked about. So when you're wearing a mask, that's connected to shame, right? You're afraid to be seen as your authentic individual. You do that for too long, you're going to hit burnout. Burnout is the freeze response in the nervous system, right? It's all the things. And so then it everybody is at a different stage in the journey. We're all on the same journey. We're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is love, purpose, meaning, right? And there's what appear to be setbacks in the journey, but really if you zoom out and you view it from the lens of like a spiral, what's happening is you're not in the exact same spot you were a year ago, because you've traveled farther. You have a different level of awareness, a different level of perception, a different level of tools. And so you are experiencing something similar, but it's not the same. And so you get to come at it through a whole new perspective. And so nothing about your experience is accidental, or even saying, oh, I made a mistake, I never should have done that. Well, actually, that mistake got you to this level of awareness,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
calling it a mistake. So it's actually not a mistake. It was a very key ingredient to get
Mm-hmm.
you where you are today. And so
Absolutely.
I'm able to look at even my alcoholism as a key ingredient to who I am and where I'm at today. So it's all part of the process. And if you can kind of zoom out a little bit and really relax that rigidity or that need to control the outcome, you'll enjoy the process a little bit, a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, of course, some individuals who are stuck in a state of like, in a very difficult state, it's very hard for them to see the end of the tunnel. But eventually, once they are out of it, they will realize, wow, this has brought me to somewhere so much greater, because you realize your worth in those difficult times. And it's an opportunity for you to decide, am I going to go towards better, or am I going to keep on repeating the same patterns over and over and over until I finally learn my lesson to get out of there? And that's what I've been through trial and error as well, through many years of trying different things as well, different diets, different like training principles, mindset, all of this, jobs. And now I'm finally doing, what I enjoy and what I love, and I'm spreading, my passion with the world, and it's made me who I am today, just like you said. So without those failures and those experiences and those hard times, I wouldn't have gained the knowledge and the experience and to understand what's important to me, what's important for my value system. Like, this is like the things that I want to prioritize in my life, and once I get to that point, then I can create the life through my actions, because it's not only important to know it here, but it's important to apply it in daily life, set boundaries, to be able to create this bubble where you feel like, like I'm so happy and fulfilled in my life. I'm doing what I enjoy and I love. And this is where you can experience, I believe, vitality.
Yeah, 100%. You've got it. You've got it all locked in and dialed in that complete level of understanding. It's that embodiment process. And it's a process. Life is a journey. It's all building, the foundation for the home that we get to live in when we're old, and it's just, it really is a pretty awesome experience. And to be able to coach individuals in this process from my own personal space of lived experience, it really is just a blessing. I couldn't have imagined that this would be my job ever. So
yeah, exactly. You are here where you are today because of everything you've been through, and now you are able to help other individuals who are in those situations. And I feel that for you is extremely rewarding, because you can relate, and then you can also be the best coach for them. Well, Kelley, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was such an epic conversation, and even from the first question that I asked you, like, you just already blew my mind. So I knew, like, wow, like this is gonna be so awesome. And this whole hour and more has been really, really awesome. So where can people find you and get in touch with you? I will be sharing this on my podcast on Spotify and YouTube as well, so people can reach out to you and connect with you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Kelley Croft, which is different than my name, which is Kelley Erickson. But and then you can listen to us on our podcast, which is the Quantum Connection Roundtable. We've had Andreas on. We're going to have him back on with his partner Tina and have an epic conversation. And then I'm on TikTok now, which is my handle is the Unburdened Self. And I don't post on there nearly as much, but I'm trying to get the hang of things over there. So that's where you can connect with me and and join the whole experience.
Awesome. So I will be linking to all of Kelley's information in the description as well, so then people can connect with you and find you. Thank you, Kelley. It was really, really awesome. And, I really appreciate all of your knowledge and wisdom. And I feel like we offered the audience so much great and valuable information today. Like, I was kind of diving into your Instagram page, trying to, find the foundation of your posts, to try and get where is it all arising from. And I was trying to, dig all the information. So I hope I was able to illuminate your work.
Yeah, it was great conversation. We were able to do the full circle from emotions to quantum to consciousness and back to emotions again. So yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Andreas.
This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.